So, doing a quick overview of the air suspension system on the 97 Century. So I'm going to start with the shocks. So once you pull this cover off, you're going to have this piece here is part of the electric dampening system. I've already unplugged it. Replacement shocks don't come with these, but it's simply, all it's going to do is it rotates that clockwise or counterclockwise, depending on what the setting is. I believe this is connected with the sport and snow modes, where it affects the transmission and also affects the ride. So these there's a guy I got a lot of information from in the UK, and he knows Lexus. He doesn't know anything about Century, but these systems are really similar. According to him, those essentially never go out, and you can see where it's going to reach in and adjust the dampener inside the shock. Now, as far as the air supply going in, I've built a test jig so I can air up the shock independently of the car system, and so in this case I had it running all night and it's holding air nicely. When you pull off, it drops down there, this airline, you're going to notice that it's kind of a non-standard fitting. This collar threads onto the shaft. I'll show you an exposed shock later. And this entire shaft goes into the shock housing. You'll notice where my thumb is, there are two O-rings. This can be a failure point on it, and the service manual says these are non-reusable parts. So for me, I'm going to order some of these. You can get them out of Japan pretty cheap. The US, that's where I am, the US-based Lexus dealers can get those for you, but they're a special order and they're going to take you, up to a week to get. But for me, I'm going to put it back, but I'm going to have extras on hand because that's just silly to have a $2 part stopping you. So now the shock itself, this is one of the front shocks pulled out, and you see where the dampener is going to go on there. Airline will connect up here, and that is actually an M12, very non-standard. When I built the test jig, that was the biggest problem. I had to go to a different state to get a fitting. Typical failures that I'm coming across, people see oil down in this part, and if you've got oil here, you're just dead. There's nothing that can be done about it. There are some folks, I think in Poland, that say they can rebuild the airbag system, but I don't think they touch it when it's down here. Now, an interesting note is they have a part number right here on the shaft, and that part number is the exact same one for the right and the left front. So when you're ordering, the Toyota Epic data tends to have a left and a right listed, but when you drill down, it's the exact same part. They have the dampener twisted around, and it'll always face in towards this. Now, some questions I do see coming up. This is a protective boot, and some of them are pretty badly cracked. That doesn't mean that you have a failed shock. It just means that this protective cover for rocks and anything else coming up with the road has taken some hits. If you remove this tie wrap and look in there, you can actually now see underneath there, and some folks say you can roll it back. I've never seen that, but the airbag starts down in here. So this is just nothing. This particular shock, when I run it on my jig and on the car, it does lose air overnight. The air levels, I'm sitting at, with the car up at that height, which is nice and level, 30 inches from the floor to the top of the fender trim, I'm at 96 psi. So I've been able to just set the rig up on this, walk away from it, and this shock was bleeding down without the weight of the car. I was losing probably 5 psi every 12 hours or so. So in a day, I'd lose 10 psi out of it. Okay, so here's where the interesting stuff is. This is, let's see, right in front of the right front under the bumper. You have to pull the wheel off, remove this shield, and what we've got here, first thing you see is the compressor. Out of the top of the compressor runs over into the bottom here of, and I call this a splitter valve. And what it's doing is it's taking, let's see, there's an electrical line at the top, and there are O-rings inside this sealed valve. You've got going off to the, I believe, center. This is the left wheel, and this is the right wheel shock. And then out of the back, you can see this fitting here, that runs off to the rear of the vehicle with one line. There's another one of these valves listed, and I understand it is by the differential. So, all right. So a little bit more here. A couple of wear items. Compressors can get noisy, and let's see. See right here, there's a bushing. There's 3 bushings, another one up there, and then there's one on the back side. It's my understanding, and I've seen the part numbers, when your compressor starts rattling, you can see I've got a lot of play there on this one. That is like a $3 bushing. So on my next order, I'll be ordering O-rings for those fittings, and I'll replace that bushing, which just pops right in. And the top one looks really good. You can see the kind of where it's collapsed. It's collapsed there, non-existent. And the top, I've got quite a bit of rubber sticking out of there. So this will quiet down a noisy compressor, because that thing's going to be going up pretty intensely. So when the wheel assembly, we'll talk about that in a little bit, sends a message to one of these 2 actuators in the front, or again, this will be the same in the back. If it's going to air it up, what it'll do is it'll turn on the compressor and open one of these 2 ports to allow the air in. Now, if it's going to lower the car, what's happening is you'll get the signal on this line to open the O-ring inside this valve, and then the exhaust comes all the way back. The air is coming out of the shock down this line, and then comes back through the compressor, and you can see this little screen right here. This is where air is coming out of the system when you're going to be lowering the car. So, you know, there's quite a few places where you could have a potential leak. Because what's happening is when the shock is under pressure like we are now, this line that's coming all the way from my right front is sitting there with close to 100 psi of pressure in it. There's an O-ring listed up in here, and there's the 2 O-rings listed at the shock end. You can have a leak there. This housing can have a leak in it, as well as a shock. So there's several places if it's just one corner. And again, this back line is heading, this goes back towards the rear of the car, and there's another one of these with its O-rings and its own electrical connections back there, which are going to be controlling your air up and air down. And again, if you're going to be having air come out, which potentially anywhere along the line if you've got a leak. It could be any one of those points up until it's coming out here. And there's I believe, a small gate valve inside this section. And I don't think it's a repairable item, but that gate valve is allowing air to come back up this line, because the air is, in fact, if you're lowering the car, it's coming all the way back into the compressor, through all this, and then out through this bottom end. So it's a little bit of a complicated system, but nicely they've got a few replacement parts in there. And then finally, this section in here, what you see is this back line goes down and connects up. See it? Connects up to the lower part of the suspension. So what happens is this bar right here, where it's pointing down, when the car is at normal height, that bar will be level like this. And so if, for example, if I had no air in this, it was all the way down, this arm is going to be pointed, it's going to point way up like this. Then on the other side, you'll see, if I can get it, this electrical device. What this is doing is it's taking this is the mechanical section of it. Here I need to add, here I don't add, here I exhaust some air from the shock. It goes into this, which is going to convert the mechanical angular to a air in or air out position. Runs up, and this runs, no, it runs up there and it's tied into the ECU and etc. Because what you'll have is when you flip that at the normal height of, let's see again, at this normal height of ride level, when you flip that switch on the dash that says go ahead and raise me up to the max height, it then says this isn't where I want to be. In fact, I want to be more like this, and this should be my new level height reading. And then when you flip the switch back to normal ride height, it'll let the air exhaust through that splitter valve and up through and out the bottom of the filter, and it'll then say this is the normal ride height. So this is how I'm bench testing the air shocks for leakage. At this jig that I had made up allows me to connect up here. I've done soap tests to make sure that I'm not leaking from this joint, and I'll put my cap on the end of the universal fitting here. Essentially, I've aired this up to 96.5 psi, and I'll let it sit. This is the one I just pulled out, and it does have a very slow leak, but I'll check this in like, well, this time tomorrow, and I should be down at least 10 psi. But this has been a nice handy thing. I'm able to connect this up while it's on the car, so I don't even have to pull the shock out. And a couple of settings. The bolt at the lower end is spec'd out at 119 foot-pounds for torque, and I believe these are around 56, 57 psi, foot-pounds when you're swapping them out. So those are two good numbers to know. And there is a spec on this, but I don't have a way to actually note it. None of my spanners have got anything built in, and I'm not trusting a crow's foot. So this is how I'm bench testing the air shocks. And I did got a couple of used rear ones, and after this process I'll just go and set those up each overnight and watch for leakage on that, and then just put them back on the shelf. Sort of a side note, because I'm able to air up just one side without having the car on, which means I've isolated myself. When I brought up the driver's side on the right side, to 96 psi. I had a level car running at 30 inches on both sides. Now, when I had the right side totally deflated all the way down to 0 pounds, the shock is disconnected. My measurement on the left side was about this 26. So the big takeaway from that is when you have one side go flat, and you might be looking at your car thinking that you've got both sides going down, it could just be the one side, and it looks like when it shifts the weight onto the lowered corner, it does drop, in my case, from 26, 4 inches up to 30 when I had them both fully inflated. That would probably be about that max ride height. And then when I'm down running at normal height and let the car air up both sides, I'm sitting, between 28 and 29. And so just as an interesting side note, that unless it's going down on both sides all the way to the hard stops, you may not have lost your suspension on both sides. It could just be the one corner. So quick recap, I have put the original damper back on the replacement shop. It's not bolted in, but I'm going to play a little bit with some settings and watch for that gear movement. I've pulled the jig off and replaced that Honey Dipper style fitting in there. And be aware, if you're going to cut that airline, it's not a standard off the shelf, and the Honey Dipper part is actually part of that airline. So you can replace the O-rings, but you're not going to find that airline fitting at all. You're going to have to make something up. So I'd be really cautious if you're going to cut those airlines, cut them in a place where you can splice them, or you're going to have to buy a whole new airline. So the way this is going to work is when that mechanical actuator is in the wheel and it says, hey, I'm gonna need some air, it'll fire off the pump, open up the particular port on any one of the 4 wheels that's asking for it, add the air in, it'll come up and just simply air up the bag. Then once that actuator, the mechanical actuator, gets to where it's happy and it's sitting horizontal, it tells the sensor that's behind the wheel to turn everything off, and you'll just sit there idling. When you're going to have to lower that wheel, so the arm is pointing down, it will send the electrical signal to one of the 2 valves, whichever's connected to that wheel, and it then allows the air to pass all the way from the shock out through those one of 2 valves, back through the pump and out through that the bottom of the air compressor. So if you've got a leak, it can be anywhere throughout the system. It might not just be the shock. So they do say O-rings are not reusable. There's 2 here, 2 at the other end at the what I'm calling the splitter valves. I'm not taking them apart to see, but I believe it's actually a formed fitting there as well. And then you have one more potential where it's got the gate valve inside the compressor. So this is basically everything I know about the early Gen 2 Century. So mine's a 97. I understand all the way up to 05, and then they've changed some parts, but I've never seen one to really see it. And many of these parts are right off an LS 400. They had it as the 21 chassis code in Japan and Europe. In the States, they never identified as 21. It was the UCF20, but they instead optioned air suspension instead of having the designation of the UCF or whatever it is, 21. So that's pretty much what we've got, and I hope this helped you.